Welcome to this week's episode, Beyond the Paycheck. In this episode, Jeff and Erin sit down with doctoral researcher and award staffing EVP Derek Freese. Together, they tackle why retention isn't a math problem, because by the time your best person brings up money, the real conversation already happened without you.
I view the money and pay conversation as the symptom, not the problem. And by the time we get to the leader, it often sounds like that is the issue, but really it's cleanest, it's the safest, it's the least emotional way to explain a much deeper problem.
Highly Adaptive is a podcast where staffing and consulting leaders learn to outpace change. Hosted by Jeff Pelliccio and Erin MacKenzie, they'll cut through the noise to bring you practical moves you could use right now to grow, adapt, and lead. All right, let me ask you something. Think about the last team member you lost, the one you didn't see coming, the one you thought that was happy. What was your first thought when they told you? For most of us, it's the same thought. What was the offer? We've trained ourselves to believe that retention is a math problem. If we just get the number right, we keep the people we want. But what if the number was never the answer? Most leaders point to compensation. Some add benefits, equity, growth opportunities, flexibility. And all of that matters, but none of it explains why your strongest performer walked out the door for less money, or why one you just counteroffered is already polishing up their resume on the other side. The truth is, you can't outpay a meaning deficit. The thing keeping the best people isn't a number on a pay stub. It's something you can't put on a pay stub. And once you see what that something actually is, you stop running retention as a defense game and start building it as a purpose every day. We've got someone with us today whose research lives right inside this very question. Someone who's spent years studying what makes work feel meaningful and what happens to people, to teams, to leaders when it doesn't. So grab your notebooks, get your coffee. This one's going to change how you think about the people on your team right now, long before money ever enters the room.
Great introduction, because I am incredibly excited that we are joined by Derek Freese, Executive Vice President at Award Staffing in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. This episode is about what actually keeps your best people, and Derek is honestly the right voice to be in the room with us right now. So super excited about this. And the reason why I say that is because Derek spends his days at the intersection of staffing strategy and human reality, leading sales, marketing, and brand strategy at Award. He spent years helping companies build resilient teams and helping people find work that honestly genuinely matters to them. The thread running through everything he does is a phrase his organization has built around: connecting people through meaningful work. His academic background goes even deeper into the question itself. He's doctorally trained with research focused on ethical leadership and the psychology of meaningful work, including how it intersects with social economic status, equity, and pay. He's a creator, he's a learner, he's a father, and at his core, he's a servant leader, which means he's not afraid to say what most leaders generally will dance around. So Derek, welcome to Highly Adaptive.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. I'm excited for this one. I think the topic is dead on, especially, pay matters, obviously, but because people have real lives and real bills, but pay can't do everything. At some point, leaders have to ask whether people are just staying because the check clears or because the work, the culture, and the place actually means something to them. And that's the part I'm really excited to talk with you guys about today and for your audience and listeners.
I think this is going to be great. I mean, I know myself, I've even left a company for a lower pay because of the culture and the people that I wanted to go to. So before we dive in and get into all of the core, the root, the fun stuff here, Derek, I want to kind of get a short version here of how did you get here? How did meaningful work really become the question you ended up building your career around and your research around?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and it's always a funny story. I love stories. Growing up, I've always been a person that has identified myself through the things I did, the tasks, the activities, and after graduating from grad school, really my work. And so I've always had that shared identity. And so when I landed at Award Staffing, very serendipitously, experiencing staffing for the first time and really seeing what it's about and some of the great things and some of maybe not some of the great things that we deal with in hiring. But fast forward after my first couple of years of being in staffing, I got to lead a sales team. And through right around the time of 2020, 2021, our organization was going through some very exciting shifts. We implemented EOS traction. And so through a lot of that, we got to identify, our values, our, what our core focus is, all of those things. And I remember when we implemented our cascaded EOS to my direct team, which at the time was sales and marketing, I wanted to do a nice launch. We went to Perkins. And for those in Minnesota, or I don't know if Perkins is completely regional, but we went out to Perkins and we started having conversations about EOS. And I remember my boss at the time, and still my boss, Tom Thiessen, the owner of Award Staffing, I'm like, okay, I had a very unruly group, very funny, lots of laughs. And I'm like, which one of these idiots is going to say something that is going to get me in trouble? That was all that was going through my head at that time. And so we're going through the VTO, right? And then we get to the core focus. And the core focus said, we're connecting people through work, right? And I was reading it as out to the group, and I said, our core focus is connecting people through meaningful work. My boss, Tom, looked up and he was eating his granny omelet, and then he stopped and he said, what did you say? And all that went through my head is, shit, I'm the idiot that said something wrong.
Right. Look to your left, look to your right, but it might be you.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, shit, it was me. I was the idiot. And ironically, he's like, no, that is it. Meaningful work. That is the thing. And ever since that moment at Perkins over breakfast and granny omelets, it's changed the course of, my life, my research, the things that I hold true to myself, along with the trajectory and the growth of award staffing. And so, again, it's always those little moments that can have the biggest impact and create the biggest positive waves. And so that is how I've gotten to meaningful work. And it's just cascaded through that where, again, being in staffing, work is so much more than just the transaction. It is so much more than that.
Yeah.
It is about the feelings, the emotions, all of those things. And so that's why this conversation is so exciting, because we're talking more than just pay, promotions, things like that.
It's funny that you call this out. And look, I think that inspiration comes from a variety of places. You never know where that thing is going to come in from that is going to hit you square between the eyes and reset your focus. And so that's why I think it's important to go and observe and be a part of as many of your engaging interactive events and industry conferences and things like that. Because I think that whether it's the material itself or maybe the way that the material is assembled, it always gives you an opportunity to sort of reframe your lens. So I absolutely love this story. And I think it's a great segue into maybe helping people uncover some of the structure around, because one of the things you mentioned, right, is that staffing is so much more than pay, but staffing is also very transactional in nature. There's a lot of components that are transactional. I think if you fall prey to the transaction, you gradually lose sight of the meaning. And so let's sort of figure out in the beginning of this, where does that happen? So, I'll hold my own beliefs and thoughts to the side for the moment, but by the time your employee or someone on your team is mentioning money, what's actually happened, and why has that been the conversation that kind of puts the manager or the decision maker in a losing position?
Yeah. When I look at that type of question, I feel by the time someone brings up money, I usually assume a deeper conversation has already happened somewhere else within themselves. Sometimes it happens in their own head on the drive home. Sometimes it happened with their spouse, a recruiter reached out, or a coworker, all those things. I view the money and pay conversation as the symptom, not the problem. And by the time we get to the leader, it often sounds like that is the issue, but really it's cleanest, it's the safest, it's the least emotional way to explain a much deeper problem.
Yeah.
It's easier to say in my mind to say, I got a better offer than it is to say, I feel like I'm not seen here, or I don't trust where we're going, or I've stopped believing in the effort that matters. That's why it's such a hard position for a leader. You're not, you're no longer having retention conversation, you're having a damage control conversation. And one of the big things in my doctoral work that pushed me to see is this concept of alienation, right? Do people usually show up? It doesn't show up as one dramatic moment. It builds through disconnection. People start feeling disconnected from the outcome of their work, disconnected from the process, disconnected from themselves, and ultimately one another. So when they finally say, "I need more money," that may be true, but it's also the language that they have available that is easier to digest and
To
palate.
simplify it.
Yeah, exactly.
Completely. Derek, you bring up some good points, but I guess one of the questions that I would think about, because obviously they've either had, like you said, their conversation with their self while they're driving the car, a friend, their spouse, whoever it might be. Maybe it's also another friend at work where they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go ask for money. I just don't feel the recognition here or anything." But what, as like a leader, these signs are generally showing up probably months before these conversations are actually having. And leaders really consistently kind of end up missing them. So, what should they be looking for? What signals in an actual employee should help spark, like, hey, I need to have this conversation with this person now so they do feel seen and heard and not going somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think one of the things that maybe bothers me is the language we have around maybe, meaning and things like that. We tell people, find your passion, discover your purpose, do what you love. That sounds really nice, but it quietly puts all the responsibility on the individual.
Mm.
If you didn't find your passion, that's on you. That's not the business, right? So if someone doesn't feel meaning in their work, the hidden message becomes, well, maybe you haven't found your passion yet, or maybe you need a better attitude, or even maybe this just isn't for you. I don't think that's really good enough perspective. And I think that's where, for me, I start a lot of what are the words we're choosing as leaders and employers to signal to our people? Because most people spend a massive portion of their lives working. So if it feels meaningless, I don't think the employees and employers get to shrug and say, well, that's a personal problem. If the leader wants people to stay, care, contribute, believe in the place, they have to take some responsibility for the conditions that make meaning possible. So if we tell people that meaning is entirely their responsibility, well, we shouldn't be surprised when they're looking for it somewhere else, right?
Sure.
And so for me, I think a lot of it doesn't even start with what are the diagnostic things. I think it's almost a preemptive thing. It's almost a company doing an audit or a leader doing an audit. How do my employees feel about the work? And starting from there, because like I said, a little bit earlier, think about, when we talk about pay and when pay becomes the conversation, well, that's in my mind the last step
Yep.
in that conversation. So how do you get ahead of that? And it starts with a lot of things, I feel, with self, looking in the mirror and saying, how can I better cultivate an environment where meaningful work is possible? And I know we'll get into the prongs of meaningful work, but I think that's where it starts, is you have to almost preemptively look for it versus waiting for signals to come out of the woodwork to be like, okay, now here's a problem. Now I got to fix it. That's reactionary. I think a lot of meaningful things, when we're talking about it, has to be preemptive.
Sure.
Is it also a reframing then of the way that you're asking things? So if you're telling your employees, like, we want you to be passionate, we want you to love being here, is it more also a reframing of, hey, what is your passion here at work and how can I make sure that it's being fulfilled? Is there also, like, as a leader, because you were talking about how we miss that, right? Like, we're telling them to do all this stuff, but it is also a reframing of how do we get them to also open up what is the most important to them within the work world?
Yeah. And I think some of that is kind of around maybe changing the posture of leadership, right? When you're looking at, Jeff, you hit on this right away in the beginning of your intro. We tend to look at turnover, retention in dollar and cents.
Yeah.
And so when we're asking a question like, how little can I spend to keep you? The whole relationship becomes defensive in my mind.
Sure.
The leader is guarding the budget, the employee is making their case. It feels like there is a negotiation. But maybe when the question becomes, what would it actually cost to lose this person? We start as leaders thinking maybe a little bit differently. Now you're not protecting a salary band or things like that. You're protecting trust, continuity, knowledge, customer relationship, team stability, the future performance. That opens up, I feel, a much better conversation, not just what numbers keep you here, but make this a place you'd still want to be a part of and still be here. And that's where money and meaning have to really work hand in hand. So I think it's really changing the conversation around the questions we're asking one another. And they have to be more relational, especially when we're dealing with psychological benefits and things of that nature.
I think you raise a great point, right? Like from the leadership perspective, oftentimes we try to negotiate how much we have to spend to keep you without consideration to how much it would cost to replace you. Right. And that is super, super tricky. The other side of this token is like, when people come to you and they say like, well, I'm leaving, and they call attention to just like a dollar amount as the component. Let's also be honest, right? A lot of these people are not in decision-making roles, or they have limited decision-making capabilities. So their ability to impact their environment is pretty negligible, especially when you're talking about something that is not quantifiable by some sort of a metric. So like, are they like, who wants to do a happiness survey? Like, I think it's important, right? Just for the record, I know I kind of like just joked about it, but like, it's important to do happiness surveys, but you have to do it with the intention of actually following through on a happiness survey, knowing and understanding that it likely will get to a very soft conversation that is not going to be a direct dollar and cents conversation, because you're trying to like circumvent this future problem. So I think that like by the time money enters in, the real conversation is already past. You're already way too late. And I think that, overcoming that tension is almost insurmountable. And so at that point, I would be using it as a leader, as an opportunity to like really rethink and reimagine what the soft tissue is around our organization that will hopefully keep me out of that conversation in the future. Let's talk about kind of like the inversion of this, right? So like, what do most leaders actually calculate when they think about retention? And what is sort of the math that they're missing? I mean, I kind of teed it up a little bit in this like happiness bit, but like, let's kind of move into that like inversion place.
Yeah, so there's a variety of different ways could answer your question, but for me, in staffing, right? Everybody falls into staffing. No one ever seeks out like, hey, I want to work in staffing, things like that. So, but when you get into it, you learn pretty quickly that the replacement of finding a new person is never just about finding another person. You're replacing context, trust, judgment, ramp time, relationships, and sometimes the stability that person brought to the team. I've seen it even in our own business at Award Staffing. Pre-launching EOS to post EOS, when we focused, once upon a time too heavily on metrics, activity, performance, we could drive output, but that didn't always create attachment, right? Attachment to the work, care for the work, curiosity for work. People can perform and still be disconnected, right? The real shift, came when we started paying more attention to meaning, culture alignment, whether people felt connected to the work and the place. That's when retention really improved for us. So I think leaders miss that real math. The cost is not just about what it takes to hire somebody new, is what gets damaged when someone good decides the place is no longer worth staying for. And you can look at it as those very transactional costs, but again, we're human beings, we're not machines. And I think that's where a lot of conversations around AI come in, is what is the point of AI? Is it to replace the person, or is it to augment and help them grow faster, larger, greater, make better decisions?
Sure.
So true. And I mean, I think that whenever we lose someone, there's as much where it costs almost more emotionally than it does financially.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, because of everything that's kind of coming in there. And I mean, I think that a question I'd ask you probably, Derek, is like, do you think that leaders really truly then underestimate how much instability one departure actually creates?
Good question.
Oh, man. I think it starts with what the company deems as important. If it's very transactional, then I would say in those circumstances, next person up, right?
Yeah.
But that's what the culture requires, or that's what they've allowed the culture to become. But if it's a culture that is built around community, belonging, things of that nature, and you try to build a system where people are connected to the work, care about the work, then that departure has just immense amount of impact, right? There's so many people out there. You can find somebody to replace a task, but talk about replacing the whole human being, the emotions, the stories, the families. Like, I brought home my daughter's both of them when I started working at award staffing. Like that is a part of who I am and who part of the story of this company is seeing my family grow up with the people I care about. There is no amount of cost that could replace those stories,
Yep.
but that's who we've wanted to become. So I think a lot of it starts with intent of what is the leader's intent. If it is just to hit P&L numbers, output goals, things like that, yeah, all that's important. But if that's the only thing, then sure, a turnover is going to be just a numbers game. And so that's where there's this duality happening, I think, right now in the workforce.
And I think you also mentioned it, like you kind of like, it was very light, but I picked up on it. When you're dealing with symptoms versus causes, right? And I think that like, if you are a symptom-based organization, then you probably don't give much consideration to the impact of anyone leaving, and you get this, okay, who's next sort of mentality, right? It's all transactionalized because it's not personal, and you're just looking at the numbers and you're moving around ones and zeros to make it all fit and line up. But when you actually go back in and you start addressing causes of things, it allows you to really take into consideration this like, culture, subcultures, like cross-cultural elements between departments, and like, where the value system lies. When organizations are brand new and they've just started out, it's really easy to point to all these things because it's the three people that kind of kicked it off in the room together, right? Like,
right.
You're all invested at this very same level. You're all concerned at the very same things, and you're all trying to protect each other at the same level. But at some point, look, I'll just speak on behalf of myself. Like, we've gone through our first 5 years, and, it is really, really hard to maintain that same level of individualistic care across an organization when you're growing and you've got so many team members around you that it almost becomes even more important that you start instilling this in the leadership that follows you, so that way they can instill it in the team that follows them. And so I think that when you are an organization that lives in symptoms, I think you fail to see the importance of addressing the cause. And that's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate.
Absolutely, it is. I agree. I think you put it very nicely and very eloquently.
Try to be delicate.
I want to ask one more thing before we kind of transition to another kind of topic here. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up, Derek, was around potentially the counteroffer. Because if you do have someone that's coming in, I think sometimes they come in because they're saying they're going to leave, but they don't really want to leave as well. They really want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be recognized. They want you to know that they want to stay. But what's your thoughts on counteroffer? Do you feel that it's really someone's expecting a counteroffer and eventually they're just going to resign anyways?
Yeah, there's that counteroffer or that stay interview, right? Because once you make that commitment, or when that person says, hey, I'm leaving, there's a variety of different ways the organization can go about it. It's like, yep, thank you for your service. Usher them out the door. You move on, right? Or it's the conversation of how did we get to this point?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of vulnerability you have to be okay with as a leader if you see the humanity in the person, right? Beyond just the dollars and cents. I can replace the activity. I can't replace the person, right? And so a lot of, I would say, stay interviews or, try to renegotiate, things like that. I feel that it can be a lot very surface level. And so, questions like, are you happy, or what would make you stay, are not bad, but they're broad for people to give safe answers, right? So when you're starting to go down that negotiation point, like as a leader, you have to be vulnerable, right? Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, right? You have to be vulnerable because, people don't necessarily quit companies, they quit bosses. And so as a leader or a boss, you have to be okay with hearing some of the inconvenient truths. But have you built that trust with your employee for them to be that vulnerable with you? Have you created that safe space, the psychological safety needed for those conversations? Because then the conversation becomes more diagnostic. You get closer to the actual work instead of saying, again, are you happy? Where did it stop making sense to you? Or instead of saying, do you like the culture here? Where do you feel like you've had to edit yourself to belong here? So again, you're just really changing the perspective and the mindset to really get down deep psychologically, emotionally. But to do that, if you're going to counter, you have to be in a position to accept that feedback and realize, maybe the errors in your ways. What did I miss? What have I not seen? And if you're not willing to do that, then I would say allow the person to go, because at the end of the day, you're only going to keep solving those symptoms.
And it's not just being ready to hear the feedback. You also have to be ready to act. And I would just say this, right? If the only time that you show up to care is at this inflection point, then you're just treating symptoms, you're transactional. Like, you have a much larger field to plow before you can get to these concepts, right? Like, because you're so late to this game. Like, now I do think as an exit, it's a really good opportunity to be able to identify specifics around like what this person may be feeling or experiencing as a catalyst to sort of like get that conversation going at a leadership level. But holy shit, like, if you're there and now I'm like, well, Derek, like, are you happy? Are you not? Like, are you kidding? Like, now you're going to ask me if I'm happy? Like, I'm already, like, I'm a foot out the door.
I needed you to ask me before while we were at Perkins.
I'm giving you my back. I was crying in the office, right?
We should have done it over.
Like, I'm stressed. I'm going gray. Like, but now you show up and you're like, oh, do you care? Yeah. Like, no, I don't feel like the company cares about me. You've got to be, if you're going to welcome that or you're going to invite that conversation, you have to be ready to do something with it. Otherwise, here's what will happen is that person is still going to go regardless. And the fact that you opened up that conversation at that moment and then did nothing with it, that will ripple back through the organization as well. People talk. It is going to actually work 10 times against you. But I want to move this into the next space because I do love where we are. And I feel like this could be like a 3-hour podcast if we're not careful. But like, leaders who think how little to keep, they're just running on defense. We've already classified that. Start working on causes and get away from symptoms. And if you're going to ask questions, use the responses and like make change from the organization level in order to make sure that people understand the why and what they're there. But I want to get into these 4 prongs because I feel like this is like where the meat of this conversation really is. So most leaders think about like equity as a measurable thing: pay, promotion, growth, responsibility, all that kind of stuff. But what is fair psychologically? What does fairness look like through the lens of how people experience and perform work and like interact with that organization?
Yeah. And I think a lot of that starts with my doctoral work. It was just very, again, as much as a leader, we want to be in control of things. There's a very artistic part of me that you just have to see where things take you. And as I was working through my doctorate and my research, something really hit me. And this is, again, you said it well, but the idea of fairness, psychology, because when we get to talking about meaningfulness and meaningful work, that's a psychological component, right? So when I think of fairness, it has to include pay, promotion, growth, and opportunity. Like, that's, bar none, right? Those things matter. But I think as leaders, we often stop there because those are the things we can measure. The hard question is, what gets distributed psychologically? Who gets context? Who only gets instructions? Who has a voice? Or who only gets to work through compliance? So you can see some of those things. But if you're, this is where fairness gets uncomfortable, because a lot of organizations, in my research, meaning is not evenly distributed, right? So think about that. The things you find meaningful are not evenly distributed. And this is where socioeconomic status comes in. What I found is the closer you get to power or more status, the more likely you are to have autonomy, visibility, influence, purpose, and connection to the strategy. The further away you are from power or the lower socioeconomic status you are, the more likely you are your outputs, or you are reduced to speed, or repetition, output, obedience. So psychological fairness is about whether people have access to the conditions that make them feel human, right? So think about that. Recruiting for a CEO position or recruiting for an entry-level warehouse pick and pack and roll? Which one do you think is going to have more meaning or perceived meaning in their work?
I just want to pause for a quick. This is deep.
Yeah.
When you the thing that you just dropped, like, before we go into more examples, like, I really want this to set in, because as you're explaining it, like, this is really intense.
Yeah.
Like, the higher you are in the organization, the more autonomy, the more meaning, the more purpose, the less trivialized your role is, even though some of the things that we do are kind of trivial in nature.
Mm-hmm.
They're tied and associated to things that are part of a larger picture. And the lower down you are in an organization, the more you are managed by the metric and the KPI and the repetition of doing.
Yeah.
And here's the deal, is that doesn't necessarily have to be meaningless if you take their work and tie it to the big picture, right? And like, again, this is one of, I think, those moments of clarity, because this is a very sticky, soft, like topic that we're talking about. Like, you could easily fall through the cracks and be like, we'll go to the next episode, which, free, like, we have more episodes, but this, I feel like this is why I wanted to talk to you about this. This is why I thought it was like really important to like bring this to the surface, is because like, it doesn't cost you a thing to create meaningful connection
at every level.
Like, too often we look at things, especially in transactionalized businesses where there is like a heavy sales component, and we say, well, the only thing people care about is the money. That is not true. It is fundamentally false. And I don't have a doctor next to my name, except for when Derek's in the room. And I also haven't done the research, but I believe that there are actually studies that show that pay only gets you to a certain relative happiness before it falls off. And then more money doesn't mean more happiness.
Yeah, I mean, good person to do some look into this research. And one of my favorite research is done on motivational studies is by Frederick Herzberg, right? He looks at these two factors. There's factors that just keep you satisfied, but no matter how much more money you're going to make, it's never going to provide a sense of meaning. But it's going to keep you from being dissatisfied. But when you start looking at relationships and things like that, the more intrinsic things, then motivation goes through, increases exponentially. And so, again, I always say, motivational theory, meaningful work, I don't like to keep them in the same conversation, because then it becomes almost a transaction. Well, I need to create meaningful spaces for people so I can get more out of them. I want to look at them differently. But again, the psychology of work is very important. So, because again, once pay is fair enough to not feel insulting, the deeper question becomes, what kind of relationship does this person have with the work? Think about in staffing, the gripes we have with it, candidates, associates, things like that. What is their relationship with work? Someone that has maybe a high school degree, looking for a $17, $18 an hour job, what are the resources they've had in their life? What has been their experience? What is that relationship? And are you, as an employer or a leader, contributing to that negative relationship? Or how are you trying to build something different, show them a different way? And that, I feel, is the power of this conversation. So for me, it's like, why can't I keep these, you walk into a business, why can't I keep this person? Why don't they want to work anymore, right? For me, it's like you're putting the onus on the person. It's like, well, what are you doing to help them stay? And I think that's a lot of the perspective that we're missing, especially when we're looking at the future of manufacturing, things like that, where there is going to be that sansdemic, that shortage of people. Well, how do I focus on keeping people? Focus on your culture. Focus on the connections you're making. Make people feel valued so they care.
Well, and I think this goes across different modalities, even outside of even the LI space, wherever you're at. I mean, people need to understand how and why their work matters, regardless of what role they're at. Derek, question for you. Like, what do you think is the biggest difference between someone understanding what their roles are, what their tasks are, versus understanding the meaning behind what they're actually doing and behind their work?
Yeah. So I think, as I was doing a very complex question, and so maybe I'll jump into, Jeff, as you said, the four prongs. I think in my research, when we talk about meaningful work, it is not just this pie in the sky idea. It has components, right? There's pillars that make meaningful work. In my research, there were four specifically. There were coherence, significance, purpose, and belonging. And so to kind of to hit, Erin, on one of your questions is starting with coherence. So coherence is basically whether a work has a map. Can people understand what is expected, why it matters, how decisions get made, and what good actually looks like? Again, transparency. Go figure, right? A lot of companies confuse training with understanding. They show someone the steps, hand them the login, walk them through the process, and call that onboarding. But knowing the steps is not the same as understanding the work. When coherence is missing, people still do the tasks, but they do not really understand the logic behind them. They do not know why priorities change. They do not know why or what matters most. They do not know how their decisions connect to the larger system. And when people cannot make sense of their day, they stop offering judgment and they ultimately just comply. So, to put more simply, coherence is the difference between I know what buttons to push versus I understand why I'm a part of this or how
Yes.
my
completely.
contribution gets
Nailed
makes the
it.
difference.
Yeah.
We need like an applause soundbite right there.
When the budget grows, right? When the budget
Yeah.
grows, you can afford those sound
That's
effects.
right. Like meaningful work can't be transactional or trivialized, right? And like, one thing I would just say is if you're sitting here listening to all this and you're like, well, I wonder where I am in this mix, like assess the relationship that you've created in your professional environment, because we all create the relationship from an organizational perspective, especially when you're sitting in a leadership role of sorts. But, I would even say, I would argue that like when we're talking about subcultures, even like individuals who are either champions, change makers, or disruptors, they also have an opportunity to be able to create a professional network. And ask yourself this question, like, does it really care or is it abusive?
Yeah.
Like, because if everything is being transactionalized and you say in one hand that you care and you're like, oh my God, like, how is everything going? But then you're like, get those KPIs done. Like that, I'll be honest, like it feels a bit abusive in nature. It feels a bit like, disingenuous. It's not like, it isn't really saying that you care. And I'm not saying that KPIs aren't important. I know obviously they are, but like, when you're going to have this conversation about care, meaningful work, and everything else, like you have to show up. You have to truly be honest and have authenticity behind that. Otherwise, all you're doing is lip service, and then you're back to the same square one. You just expended a lot of energy to get there.
Yeah. And I think some of that too is when you look at maybe that leads it perfectly into the next pillar of meaningful work, significance. Significance is about whether people can see their work actually doing something. Does something change? It's not about a fake mission statement in a way, the real practical way. Who is better off because I did this today? What did my effort protect, improve, solve, support, or make possible? Again, to your point, Jeff, a lot of the work we do gets reduced to activity. Did the ticket close? Were the orders filled? Were the calls made? And so when significance is missing, people start to feel like they are feeding the machine. They are being busy all day, but they cannot point to what their effort actually changed. And if people cannot see impact, they eventually stop donating that extra care, that discretion, that, those types of things, So again, when you're looking at thinking, how do I create significance? One of my favorite things that stories I always read about in my research was what Medtronic does, right? When they have these all company conferences and these big auditoriums, they bring in the patients, the people that lives have changed because of the life-saving medical devices they make.
Wow.
Right?
Sure.
Connecting people to the outcomes of their work, allowing them to see the fruits of their labor. So again, it is not just a transaction. The widget I put in this box made a difference for this person. The medical device I assembled with my hands will save somebody's life and keep their family intact. Like, that is very hard for businesses, especially in 2026 when we're living a capitalistic society. It is about output, growth, all those things.
Yeah.
But you got to show why that person is doing what they're doing. The lives saved, the differences made, the families kept together. I mean, we're human beings, communal beings. We need to see that larger community.
Yeah.
Completely. I mean, that's significant. I mean, people need to feel that their work creates impact across the board. They have to. And I know your next one was really around, I believe you said it was purpose, right? So purpose was kind of big. And when I think about purpose, I think this is really where like values alignment determines your long-term sustainability, really is where kind of that is. For purpose, really quickly, like how long can someone operate in an environment that conflicts with their values before it actually starts affecting them psychologically?
Yeah. So, I would say a great example is think about companies or lenders that are predatory lenders, right? In the moment, you may be an employee that is helping somebody secure a loan because there is an immediate need, right? There's that significance portion of that transaction or that relationship. But the bigger overall purpose is that alignment with my values of self. Do I believe like I am doing good work here? really, and let's say that example of predatory lending, no, because I know I'm putting people into a situation where they might not get out of. And it might be helping them now, but with my values and who I want to be,
It's going to bury them later.
oh, yeah, it's going to bury them later. And so, you know, but if we believe that, business model ultimately traps people in the debt, like for that example, they have a purpose problem. That is where people start splitting themselves. I have the work self over here, and I have the professional or the home person over here. They believe two different things. And that's often does not show up in an interview or an exit interview. It shows up 9 months later when that person realizes, I can't do this job anymore. I do not want to become the kind of person this job is asking me to become. So again, there's that value alignment. Does the company's values and approaches align with my values and approaches? And if there's that disconnection, people start splitting and editing themselves in ways where it's, you're creating facades.
And so now do all of these things, right? The coherence, the significance, the purpose, do these all roll up into the crescendo of belonging, or is belonging its own individual like measurement or benchmark? Right? Like, is this a compounding element that kind of that builds up, or is it individual in its nature?
I would say individual in its nature. And so when we look at belonging, it's beyond just, not friendliness. Belonging is not ping pong tables, Slack channels, things like that. It is whether people like each other enough to survive a happy hour. Belonging is whether people feel safe enough to know, support, and be included in ways that actually holds under pressure, challenges, hard conversations. Those are the things. And ironically, if there's one thing your listeners can take away out of all my research, the single most important element of meaningful work that helps, rocket fuel per se of meaningful work, it starts with belonging.
Yeah.
You have to help people feel like they belong, right? The moment they start editing themselves and listening, it's like, ooh, don't say that because someone's going to get mad, or this is the way we do things. They're going to start changing their perspective and they're going to start feeling to belong. But once you start with belonging and then you move to purpose, significance, coherence, that's where the compounding effect happens. But in my study, belonging accounted for 50% of the mediating factor between socioeconomic status and alienation. So if you don't want people to feel alienated, make them feel like they belong.
Yep.
Right?
Agreed.
And so, the way we started this, but it's quite the reverse. Belonging is the foundation, purpose, significance, coherence. If you do them in that order, then you're starting to create a space for meaningful work for somebody to start perceiving that their work is meaningful.
I love it.
Completely agree. I mean, and in all honesty, like for everyone listening, I mean, really each prong is a separate diagnostic here. And as you said, as Derek said, you've got in order, coherence, significance, purpose, belonging. And with these each being like their own diagnostics, if you don't have a retention problem here, you have a specific intrinsic deficit across the board. And the fix really depends on which one of those four prongs is broken. And you got to look at that across the board. I think it's huge. Okay, Derek, I want to kind of ask you, and one thing we always like to kind of get from all of our guests that are on here is we like to be able to give something back to the listener of what can they do immediately. So for our listeners, or for myself and for Jeff, what does this look like Monday morning? So if we're coming in Monday morning for a leader who suspects they're like underwater on one of these prongs or just don't have it, what should they be doing? What's something that they can go and put into action right away?
Yeah, so I would tell them to stop asking where or why people are disengaged, and start asking them, where has the work stopped becoming meaningful? And I don't mean meaningful in a motivational poster sense, like I said before.
Yeah.
I mean, where has the work lost coherence, significance, purpose, belonging? Somewhere the company the company is probably saying one thing and making the people live another thing. There's these contradictions. It says people have ownership, but they do not have authority. That is a coherence problem. It says work matters, but never lets people see who's better off because of that work. That is a significance problem. And if you say values matter, but every hard decision is rewarded by speed, margin, or convenience, that's a purpose problem. And last but not least, if you say people belong, but only when it's convenient, agreeable, or low maintenance, that is a belonging problem. So the move this week in that sense is simple. Find one contradiction your people are being forced to absorb. Not a complaint, not a vibe, not, a contradiction. Then name it out loud with the team and ask, what has this been costing you? What have you been feeling because of this contradiction? Because people rarely detach from the work all at once. They detach after too many moments where the stated story or the values and the lived experience stop matching. So do not start with a new program or, sorry, Jeff, a happiness survey. Start by telling the truth about one place where the work has stopped giving people something human to hold on to. That is where meaningful work begins, assessing those contradictions, what is said and what is the lived reality.
So let me ask you this. I hear where you're at, and certainly a happiness survey is not going to necessarily get us like where we got to go.
I'm sorry I had to do that.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. But like, so if a leader is listening right now, we've got 4 different pillars that we're really working from. Something is deficient, right? I think that organizationally, any organization, ours, yours, anyone's, has problems. We all have something that we can improve upon. Which one of those 4 would you recommend investing that curiosity into first, because it has like the greatest capacity, capability, universality, things like that?
Without a doubt, belonging, right?
Okay.
I think, and the hard thing with belonging is we tend to trivialize it to the idea of sameness. I need to hire people that are the same as me. That's not belonging. That is sameness, right? Hiring people that share the same values but can contribute in different aspects, right? Different lived realities, different experiences, different stories, So for us, a lot of what we're looking for is, again, since we believe in meaningful work here at Award Staffing, is hiring for that purpose. The people we're hiring, do they believe in other people, right? So when we're recruiting internally for roles, purpose-driven people are the people that stick and work. Doesn't mean that they have to believe in the same purpose as we do, but they have to be guided by a central purpose.
Yep.
There's some companies, you think IT companies, where it is a learning culture, right? They have to hire people to belong that feel that they want to learn. So for us, don't hire for sameness, but hire for belonging. People that can feel safe, feel psychologically safe to show up as really who they are. And I think that's where, when you start looking at things like DEI and stuff like that, is to bring those different perspectives and those lived realities, because belonging, if you create a culture of belonging, everything else will start to happen. And from my experience and from my research, so belonging, bar none, invest in your time.
Oh my God, I love this. I love this. Thank you so much.
Derek, this is like some amazing information for all of our listeners, for us. And we always do our highly adaptive playlist. So I'm going to go straight to the fact that I don't want your walk-up song, which I'm going to ask for anyways, but I need what's your mic drop song here? I mean, these are some mic drop moments. So if you were to hey, if you just hit some massive bombs, what song's playing in the background right now?
Oh, man. Well, I think it kind of ties into my walkout song, ironically, and not for the puns and the innuendos that it entails, but it's, Mary Jane's Last Dance by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, right?
Love it.
Nice.
For me, it's one of my favorite songs since high school. So for me, it's less about the lyrics perfectly explaining my life, but more about the fact that it has stayed with me for so long. High school is, develop a lot of the tastes. You start to become who you are and what you listen to and what you connect with, what feels like yours. And that song was just a part of that process for me. So if I'm picking, a mic drop song or a walkout song that's just kind of a little bit funny, a little bit has some innuendos, a little bit of sarcasm, that's the one I would pick, because it is clever. And I feel, for me, that's kind of my personality, and I want to pick something that really feels honest, and that would feel honest in that moment, where mic drop, little Michael Scott action, and then all of a sudden Mary Jane's Last Dance starts playing and walk off the stage, and everybody's like, what the hell just happened? That's me.
Okay, 5 seconds or less. What's your walk-up song?
Yeah, quite the opposite end of the spectrum. Descending by Lamb of God. So we went from lighthearted to we went to heavy metal.
Heavy metal walk up. Here we go. Love it.
That's epic. I love the range. So Derek, listen, you've dropped a lot of bombs in this episode, which I love. Thank you so much for all that. Where do you want people to find you? Like if they want to be able to learn more about the research that you did, if they want to just like have some candid conversation with you, what's the best place that they can connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me. Reach out if you're interested in my doctoral work. I can send you a link to my research, 302-page dissertation. Otherwise, have a conversation. LinkedIn's a great way. Otherwise, you can reach out to me at my work email, which is dfreese, Freese, at awardstaffing.com. Yeah, I would love to continue the conversation in any way I possibly can.
That's awesome.
Derek, this has been so just really eye-opening, and I love what your perspective and your research, and just really wanted to thank you for everything that you've brought to the table, from your one moment of sitting at Perkins and instead of looking to your left or right, like, oh shit moment.
It's me.
And it changed everything. It was the meaningful work. So, I mean, absolutely, everyone should be eating Grammy omelets is what I think you referenced. So we can all have those moments. So Derek, I so appreciate you for everything and being on Highly Adaptive today.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, man. So listen, we're going to leave it there. If you're a leader listening, here's the move. Don't wait for the recruiter call, right? Like you've waited too long. Pick one of the four: coherence, significance, purpose, belonging. And as you just heard, belonging is probably your go-to if you haven't already started digging into this. The one that you suspect that's the weakest on your team right now, obviously that needs to be your focus. Have one real conversation about it this week. Not a survey, not a town hall. All right, so not a happiness survey. Not a town hall, but like one meaningful conversation. Like really come in, show up, be authentic, be present. That's the audit that compounds. And so if this hits you, send it to a leader who needs to hear it. This is how the conversation moves, right? And we will see you next week with another conversation about leading from offense instead of defense.
And thanks everyone for listening to Highly Adaptive. We'll see you next week with another amazing conversation. And until then, stop defending and let's start building.
Big thanks to Allied Insight, not just our sponsor, but an industry leader and preferred marketing partner to staffing and consulting businesses nationwide. If your firm is looking for expert-level support that goes beyond the logo, you know where to go, alliedinsight.com. If this episode helped you, share it with your friends and colleagues and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. While you're there, consider leaving us a review, and when you're ready for more industry insights, articles, case studies, and more, find it on allthingsstaffing.com. This episode was produced and edited by Allied Insight, and the music provided by Home Music Stock. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.